everyone. Many thanks to Carrie and to Darren and to QCF for this opportunity to be with you all this evening. Thank you all for joining and being willing to listen to some of what I am going to share tonight. I am very excited. Shout out, because I know she'll kick my butt afterwards. My mom is joining from Florida, and my dearly beloved is joining just from the next room next to me. And so it's really nice to have part of my family here tonight. My name is delfin or delfín. My pronouns in English are they, them, or simply my name. I serve as the director of the LGBT Center here at UC Santa Cruz, the Lionel Cantu Queer Resource Center. I'm also a community group leader for QCF and have done so for a few years now, currently leading the trans and non-binary group, as well as starting tomorrow, the Catholics and sexuality group. And so excited again to be with you all this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So what we will be exploring tonight is sacred transgressions. It's an opportunity to explore, lift up, and celebrate theology from the experiences of trans people. I'd like us to start off with a moment of silence and memory and honor of the 327 known trans and non-binary people who were killed in 2023, and the 27 individuals killed here in the United States in this year. For the many stories of violence that we don't know because they are unreported or misreported. For those who have died by suicide. We mourn the dead, we grieve and we rage, we commit and recommit to fighting like hell for and with the living. Estamos aquí, siempre hemos estado aquí, siempre estaremos aquí. We are here, we have always been here, and we will always be here. I'd like to invite folks to share their cloud of witnesses, to make present their transcestors, queercestors, ancestors, folks like Polly Murray, Marinus Silva Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson. Who are the folks that you would like to make present here tonight, whose spirits journey with us, whose lives and legacies inspire us? You can speak these out loud, you can type them into the chat, or you can just lift them up within yourself. I'll take a collective deep breath and remind ourselves that we do not journey alone. We journey together as community through QCF, but also those who have gone before us also journey with us, whether we believe their spirits are with us or their memories inspire us. I could have a volunteer start us off with prayer by reading the first prayer there. I am divine. You can just unmute yourself and read it.
I was not brought here to be your punching bag, but to provide divine guidance for your soul. You do not see me as I am meant to be seen. You ignore my divinity, and instead you try and break me with your words and your body. And yet, in the midst of it all, here I am.
Thank you. Could I have a second volunteer read our queer call to worship?
Blessed be the non-conforming one, God who took on flesh of the economically oppressed, of an immigrant, of an infant, whose family and birth was anything but traditional. This Holy One won't be hindered by social norms. She defies our expectations. She challenges our preconceptions. She awakens us to new possibilities. Praise be to God, the queerest of us all.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. If we can take one more deep breath. But some opening questions for us tonight is, as trans people and or for those of you who are trans accomplices, what has been your relationship with religion? Starting off with the big, deep questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you all for sharing things in the chat. Everything from being able to teach progressive theology and biblical origins within the United Methodist Church to folks sharing also negative and hurtful experiences, and then folks resonating with this whole notion of wrestling and sort of the messiness of our experiences. I was raised Roman Catholic, and the Catholic Church is a very complicated place to be in. And there are no teachings within the Catholic Church that are very affirming or even recognize trans people. And so I've stopped going to Mass because Mass is just a very painful experience because who I am as a person isn't recognized institutionally. I am mindful that many of us are finding ways to find that peace that folks have shared, who are finding homes, fostering homes within our various flavors of Christianity or other religious traditions, and finding our own sense of peace, our own sense of home, our own sense of wholeness, inspired, connected to a religious institution, but not necessarily bound by that religious institution. And so many thanks to all who have shared and continue to share. Reality is, it is messy. And for a long time, religion was the weapon that was used against queer people, against trans people, against many other communities. At the same time, we are starting to see, and not starting, we have seen for many years now, a very vibrant trans religious movement within Christianity as well as outside of Christianity, and folks starting to ask questions and say, no, we're trans, we're here, and we have a right to be recognized. We are created in the image of God just as much as others are. We too are equally blessed. Our narratives are important. And so it is exciting to see this movement continue to grow, continue to thrive, and the rippling that it is having. Starting, this is an image from 2019. It was a billboard off an expressway. This is exciting. Is it a reflection that everything is picture perfect? No, there's still much work to do. There is still a lot of work to be done. But we also want to celebrate and lift up the progress that we've made. And so to see something like this off a highway is exciting and holizing in many different ways. This conversation is grounded in a few different frames of thought. I am Latin American and ascribe to Latin American feminism, also queer and indecent theologies, and what these theological frameworks put forth is that our lives, our stories, are sacred texts. Yes, it's important to look at scripture. Yes, it's important to look at other sacred texts. Those are sources of divine revelation, but so too are lived experiences. The challenges that we experience, the celebrations that we experience, all of that is a way that God reveals God's self to us and to the world. I have several friends who are UCC ministers and pastors, and I really just have found a home in the saying that God is still speaking, that when it comes to revelation, it is not something that was, but something that is, and that continues to happen through us and through others and those around us. And so a question I have for you all to reflect upon, for those of you who feel comfortable sharing either out loud or in the chat, what is God revealing and speaking through your life or through the lives of those around you? Another way to look at that question is, in what ways are you a source of sacred revelation and a testament that God is still speaking? So whichever question most resonates with you, I welcome folks to share their thoughts. We too are microphones for the divine, and God speaks through us and God speaks to us. But to know that our experiences as trans people, our experiences as QT BIPOC folk, our experiences as queer people, our experiences as just people, are places where the sacred reveals itself. Fascinating thing when it comes to religion is that religious traditions have documented our existence as people for centuries. And many folks who are resistant to trans people, and I would say also to queer people as a whole, often refer to us as if we're this new phenomena, when in reality, we have been here, we will always be here, and we will always be here. And so religious traditions have documented our existence. I'm extremely mindful that how we talk about gender today is very different from how it talked about 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And so our understanding of gender is different as we go back in time. I get a little uncomfortable sometimes when we start labeling folks throughout history as queer, as lesbian, as bi, as trans, just because those words didn't exist and then the understanding of gender was different. I use the term transgression intentionally because what we do see throughout history is folks who transgressed gender norms for their time, folks who disrupted the binary in very transformative ways and very powerful ways. Some of these folks may identify today with the words that we use today, but during their time, they identified as themselves. And so there is a need for us to remember, sort of as a cognitive brain function, we need to remember our narratives, but then we also need to remember, reconstruct, rebuild our narratives within religious traditions to include the whole story and not just the bits and pieces that folks who are in the dominant group are comfortable with. And so it is an act of remembering and remembering. One of the other things that I've become mindful of as I've been on my journey, I was raised in a Cuban household, in a very Catholic conservative household, where we were taught that you were not to question religious authority. You also weren't allowed to question parental authority. And so any form of questioning of any type of authority was unwelcome. And so for me, asking questions isn't necessarily because I'm trying to get to a specific answer. Asking questions is a form of liberation. Asking questions is a form of hope-filled defiance. And just being able to ask that question and sit with possibility. Again, it's not about having a concrete, specific answer, but just being able to be open and explore messiness and think about different possibilities. And that asking question is a form of liberation and hope. And so again, using questions, using transgressive as a way of breaking binaries and disrupting things. We're about to do a crash course in less than 5 minutes on an interfaith exploration of gender diversity. And we will then delve in a little bit more intentionally into Christianity. And so here we go. Within Buddhism, Buddhism teaches many things around compassion and equity and justice. One of the fascinating things from a trans perspective is the Buddha for justice and compassion, Kuan Yin. Some folks have started to identify as a trans deity just because in some places Kuan Yin is venerated as male, and in other places Kuan Yin is venerated as female. Throughout the history and narratives and stories around Kuan Yin appears in the way that is most needed. And so some folks see this Buddha, who again is the Buddha for justice and compassion, as a trans deity. Within Hinduism, there are many, many different narratives about folks who bended gender in many different ways. You have stories of gods and goddesses who appeared as both male and female at the same time, who changed from male to female or female to male, heroes who also defied different norms, different understandings of gender. And all of these narratives, all of these stories are considered to be sacred. Shiva is often presented as both male and female, or presented male or female, and both representations are seen to be equal and important and to be venerated. Within Islam, one of the fascinating things about Islam is that in some Islamic countries, unfortunately, we know that gay lesbian folks are persecuted. In some of those countries, trans people are able to receive trans-inclusive healthcare and are affirmed. But we can talk about global realities a little later. Within the Quran, there are passages that talk about the right of women to be educated and that women should be educated. You also have narratives around men who are not in need of women. Were these individuals gay men? Were they asexual? Were they intersex? Were they non-binary? We don't know. But what we do see is that there is a recognition that there are other ways of being in the world, and that these individuals were to be welcomed into the prophet's home, were welcome into spaces that were only for women, and were to be treated with respect. Within ancient and pagan traditions, you have a long history and long narratives of transgressive, of the female spirituality, of female gods and goddesses. Within certain pagan traditions, in between moments, both moments that are both and rather than either or, and so dawn, dusk, twilight, those moments of both and are considered to be sacred and a space where the sacred reveals itself. You also have the goddess Inanna, which in ancient traditions was the goddess of war, who took on many masculine traits. It was not unheard of, but still uncommon for a female deity to be associated with war. And so here you have a female war goddess whose greatest blessing that she can grace upon a person was gender transition, male to female or female to male. Within indigenous communities around the world, there are long histories of gender diversity. Here in North America, but also there are starting to be conversations of what these narratives look like both in Central and South America and the Caribbean. The presence of two-spirit folk, and extremely mindful that when we talk about two-spirit people, we are talking about a diversity of individuals. Within some tribal communities, these individuals would be potentially considered trans, and others they would be considered gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and other tribes they were considered to be intersex. A recognition that there are multiple ways of being in this world, and that these individuals were to be treated with respect, oftentimes within their tribes, serving as shamans, healers, and religious leaders. Some of these folks serving as early social workers, often mediating family issues around violence, taking in children who were in violent homes and raising the children. And so again, these narratives have been here. You also have the Mushes within Mexico, the Hijra in India. I'm extremely mindful that when we talk about other cultures, especially outside of the United States, not to impose our understanding of these communities onto them. There are many within the Hijra community who believe that they are not transgender. They are a third gender and not to be put under the trans umbrella. Here in the United States, unfortunately, we do often put the Hijra under the trans umbrella. And so something to be mindful of, not to impose our US understandings of gender upon other countries, and to respect and affirm those narratives around gender diversity. And lastly, Judaism. Within the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, also in rabbinical writings dating to the 1st century, there is a recognition of 6 genders. I was recently on a panel for middle school and high school parents and teachers. It was a religion panel, and one of the panelists was a rabbi and shared that some writings actually reveal that there are potentially up to 8 different genders. And so how would these individuals categorize themselves today? What identity label would they take on today? We don't know. But there is a recognition within Judaism that there are more ways of being in the world than just solely strictly binary male and female. Also within Judaism, similar to paganism, twilight moments are sacred moments, are holy moments where God reveals God's self. And so moments that are both and, for those of us who are genderqueer, whose understanding of non-binary is being both male and female, or neither male or female, our identities are also holy, are also sacred, because we are in between and or both and. So diving into Christianity, we have a sacred history within multiple flavors of Christianity, of folks who transgressed gender norms for their day. Joan of Arc is often lifted up as a queer saint, and even as a trans saint. We don't know how Joan would identify today with our modern understanding of gender and sexuality. What we do see, though, is an individual who dressed in men's clothing, who led the army, who had visions and experiences of God, who sadly and tragically was burned at the stake, and 300-400 years later is declared a saint. Was Joan a butch lesbian? Was Joan transmasculine? We don't know. But for a woman in France at that time, what she did was extremely transgressive and broke the binary and defied gender norms for her day. We also are starting to find narratives of folks like Marinus or Marinos, who at birth was named Marina. Marina wanted to enter into a monastery, but because Marina was identified as a woman, could not enter into the monastery by Marina's family. After her, I believe her father or both her parents passed away, Marina entered into a monastery under the name Marius, lived a life of many years of piety, service, prayer. Upon death, the other monks discovered that Marius had different body parts than them. And rather than discounting this person's story and narrative, they combined the names Marina and Marius to Marinus or Marinos, and Marinus is a Canaanite saint within the Eastern Catholic churches. And this is one of many examples of these types of narratives of folks who entered into religious life, who lived a life of service and piety, and upon their deaths, when folks discovered something a little different about them, rather than discounting, erasing them, honoring them for their both andedness. You also have folks like Teresa of Avila, Spanish nun in the 1500s, who had the audacity as a woman, especially as a nun, to theologize, to talk about the Trinity, so much that she was seen as a threat and sent to the Inquisition a few times. We don't know how Teresa of Avila would identify today, but here we do see a woman who defined both cultural and religious norms for her time. You also have the story of Joseph, and I have a clip by my friend Jay Mace, who does a spoken word piece around Joseph and the story of Joseph.
She asked if she can talk to me about Jesus at 3 a.m. on the...
Can everyone hear that? Show me an emoji or type in the chat. Cool.
C-train, because something about my queer face means clearly I'm on a path straight to hell. I've come to expect this type of reaction from strangers at least once a week since the first time I was exercised at 16. But today I've grown tired and I've decided it is my turn to proselytize. So before you do any of that, I want to know from you, have you heard the good word about Joseph of Genesis? See, Josephine, Joe of Genesis, favorite child of Jacob, aka Israel. When asked what you wanted, you desired one thing, a ketoneth pasim. Pastor called this a royal coat, and Joseph. I had never read the Bible before, found you and kept reading Josephine. I got to 2 Samuel and realized your coat of many colors was a princess dress. Joseph, your father must have really loved you because he got it for you and you wore it with pride. Joe, when your brothers saw you in your flowing dress, in your glory, they became enraged. I am sorry for the beating you received. Sorry they destroyed your dress and smeared it with the red paint of your swollen veins. Josephine, did you know they told your father you were dead? So he never come looking for you, never knew your brothers sold you as a slave into Egypt, and once you were stolen from your home fields, the earth dried up. Joe, the very ground on which you walked mourned the loss of its genderqueer child, and all the plants died, and the animals no longer had the will to live. Josephine, your family nearly starved, saw the formation of ribs where once there grew flesh and belly fat, and they, hungry and desperate, traveled into Egypt, and what must they have seen, Joe? See, in Egypt, people discovered you, not as a fag, not as a tranny. They saw you in totality. You went from slave to leader over lands. There you were, Josephine, as you, as magnificent. And your family couldn't even recognize you through the glare of divinity, but you saw them shivering in fear, waiting to hear what this regal leader might say, wondering if your spirit might see fit to grant them the grain needed to survive. And Joseph Love broke through the darkness of resentment. And for the first time, your family saw you, as magnificent, for it was your word that saved them from starvation, dear Joseph of Genesis, aka Josephine, aka Joe. I'm claiming your story for every queer kid told that we are unholy. I'm claiming your story for every queer told that in order to love, we must let our fate die. I'm going to put it in a pocket over my heart, next to Ruth and Naomi, next to David and Jonathan, next to Hegai and Deborah, and seat them at the last Passover with Jesus and Lazarus. Yes, I am taking Jesus with me too, dear pastor. To you, who claims your words are from God, but whose book has been pledged to King James, know what allegiances you keep. We have been lying about my people for too long. Thank you.
If we look both at the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, as well as to the New Testament, we see God leaning in to folks who defied the binary, who broke the binary. And so again, looking at eunuchs, folks who did not fit into gender norms for their day. Some of these folks, again, were born eunuchs. Some were made into eunuchs. Some were self-made into eunuchs. Examples of eunuchs throughout the scripture is Daniel the prophet during the Babylonian exile, the story of Queen Esther, who is able to save her people through the solidarity and support of eunuch. In Isaiah 56, eunuchs are to be welcome into the temple and have a place within the temple. And then looking to the New Testament, to Acts, the first person baptized into this new emerging Christian tribe and movement is a eunuch from Ethiopia. Philip does not ask to see what is below their tunic, doesn't ask how they have sex, doesn't ask what genitals they have. Philip simply listens to this person's experience of faith, and listening to that story is what inspires Philip to baptize them. Looking at this through today's lens, this story takes on an extreme power for myself and others, because from a modern perspective, the first convert to Christianity is a queer and trans person of color, by our US understanding of race and ethnicity. Within Galatians, and I'm mindful Paul is a hot mess, but Paul talks about that there is neither male nor female within this emerging Christian community. And then a story that is starting to receive some attention and reflection, and by starting, not just recently, but for a number of years now, is the individual who led the disciples to the upper room for what would end up being the Last Supper. Jesus tells the disciples to go into town and to find a person who is retrieving water from a well. The individual who is retrieving water from the well is a man. Men typically did not retrieve water from wells. That was something that women did, children did, and enslaved people did. Typically not men. But here is the individual that Jesus identifies as the person who would lead the disciples to the upper room. Maybe this individual was getting water for their sick spouse because their spouse couldn't do it, their children were sick. There could have been many reasons why a man was retrieving water. Again, though, at the time and within the context, it was something that was unheard of. And so here we have a very short snippet of transgression that God uses to lead folks into the upper room, and then what would be the Last Supper. Looking at Jesus's life and experiences of gender, starting with Jesus's mother, Mary, here you have a 14, 15-year-old girl take matters into her own hands, and without consulting her husband or soon-to-be husband, decides to take on a mission and ministry that was bestowed upon her, and took her life into her own hands rather than consulting a man. Something, again, that was unheard of. The witness of Mary Magdalene often being lifted up as an example, in some circles being called the apostle to the apostles, one of the first people to experience the resurrection and talk about the resurrection. You also have many examples throughout the Gospels of Jesus lifting up women as examples of faith and folks whose examples, whose witnesses were to be emulated and followed. You also have the stories of the resurrection and the transfiguration. And the transfiguration, Jesus revealing Jesus as Jesus's whole self to the apostles, but then also telling them, please don't tell anyone. And so some folks have interpreted the transfiguration as a coming out story, but also respecting that only because a person comes out to a person or to a few folks, that doesn't mean that the story is then to be made public and shared on that person's behalf quite yet. And so a fun queer reading of the transfiguration, and very similarly with the resurrection, that Jesus's whole self is being revealed and shared with the world. And so seeing the resurrection as a story of transition and affirmation. A favorite question that I love asking folks is Jesus's genetic makeup. This may be a stretch, and you all might be wondering, why is this person asking this question? What was Jesus? Was Jesus XX? Was Jesus XY? Was Jesus XXY? Was Jesus XYX? We don't know what Jesus's genetic makeup was or is. However, what we do know is that based on scripture, Jesus did not have a biological earthly father. And so science has taught us that the X or the Y comes from the Father. If Jesus didn't have a biological father, what was Jesus? Where did that Y chromosome come from? Did Jesus have a Y chromosome? It's a silly question, a fun question to ask, but for folks who have been demonized, for folks who have been otherized throughout their lives for being different in whatever ways they're different, being able to sit with that question and be like, whoa, what if Jesus was intersex? How healing and wholizing and revolutionary sitting with that question and possibility can spark in that person. And so again, as I shared earlier, asking questions, not because they have a specific or a concrete answer, but asking questions in order to spark wholeness, in order to spark liberation. And so lastly, I have two more things to touch on, and then we'll open it up for wider conversation, is looking at Genesis, looking at the creation narratives. It wasn't until I was in divinity school that I learned that there were two creation narratives. I fulfilled the stereotype of Catholics not being Bible thumpers. And so it never dawned on me that there were two creation narratives. And so there are indeed two creation accounts. If we look at one of the creation accounts, you do have God creating male and female in God's image. Some folks have started to reflect on the hour. Who is the hour in that statement? Is it a multitude of deities? Is it the Trinity? That is a whole QCF EDI conversation for another day. What we do see, though, is that from this being, male and female are created. A spectrum of gender is created. What does that say about that being? And so being able to see God as trans, being able to see God as non-binary or as genderqueer, and for those of us who have been otherized, being able to sit with that possibility and find wholeness. You also have in the second creation account, things are created in the order of importance. And so from least important to most important. The culmination of all creation is women. And so God as a feminist and and having women created last as the ultimate form of creation, how has that been forgotten and women abused and subjugated because of religion throughout history? When in fact, if we look at the importance of creation, women is created last. These are my musings and ramblings. You can be like, Delfin, I completely disagree with you. That's fine. Just sharing possibilities for folks to consider. And then lastly, looking at our lives as trans people, just as we started with the questions I asked about how God is revealing sacred revelation through your life, through the lives of others, reinforcing that our lives are sacramental. Our lives are our sources of revelation, and the need to reclaim that and proclaim that in whatever ways we can. Our existence is revolutionary, and I'm mindful to constantly have to justify who we are in the face of binaries and cis normativity. I'm mindful of having to constantly correct others about our pronoun usage, about our live names, can be extremely tiring. I want to honor that. I want to affirm that and lift that up. But I also want to lift up that our joy, our journeys of affirmation, our journeys of transition, our ongoing existence is also something that is sacramental and that non-trans people can learn a lot from. And to look at coming out as a sacred ritual, looking at a person's name change or pronoun change as a ritual that is to be sacramentalized, to look at if a person begins hormones. And I'm mindful not all of us as trans people will go through gender affirmation procedures. But for those of us that do, seeing those moments in our journey as sacramental and what can be revealed to the world in those moments through us. What does wholizing welcome mean and look for you when it comes to whether it is your family, your community, chosen family, place of work, church, however you want to reflect on that question. What does wholizing welcome mean? And then how are we claiming and reclaiming our sacred transgressiveness? And so I will stop the screen share for right now so that we can have a collective conversation. And then towards the end, we'll share my screen again because I do have a closing prayer. Thank you all. From the pit of my tummy, which is deeper than my heart, truly thank you all for the affirmations, for everyone sharing. Thank you for the affirmations about what you learned. Know that I also learn from the questions that you ask and the insights that have been shared, and much to sit and percolate and reflect on. I do have a closing prayer, and this comes from the Metropolitan Community Churches. If we can take a deep breath, center ourselves, and if I could have a volunteer or a few volunteers to read each section of this prayer.
I defied the gender binary. I challenged the first pronouncement ever made about me. I questioned the evidence my body presented to me, and I took issue with the guidance of my parents, who assumed and nudged my life down one path without even asking me if that's where I wanted to go.
I confounded my society and my culture, and I ignored what I was told was the norm. I lived on the edges and I defied definitions.
I am far more than the names I have been called. I've done many things and lived many lives. I am the rule breaker, the exception, the trickster, the one who divides and multiplies the gender binary until it becomes a string of infinite possibilities.
In ancient times, I was celebrated as one who walked in many worlds. I was revered as the one who embodied transformation and who showed the world we can change. But ancient wisdom has long been forgotten, and now I pay the price for our forgetfulness.
We tend to behave badly toward that which we do not understand, and therein lies the pain. Like all of creation, I am a mystery. I don't seek to be understood, I just seek to be accepted.
Amen. Amen. Again, thank you all. And I will turn it over to Darren and to Carrie for any closing things that you need to.
This has been great. We'll be back again first Sunday of next month. And we hope you tell others. And if you ever need to find more resources like this, visit we have a page on the Q Christian Fellowship website. Thank you so much for being here. We love you all.